it's not in your textbook, that still fall under the umbrella of economics. First topic today is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is not going to be on your final. A bunch of my friends, it might be an extra credit question if I feel like writing it, but you won't have to know any of this information. Main reason I want to talk about it, besides I studied this in grad school and I'm really interested in it myself, is the fact that a bunch of my friends have made an obscene profit margin. They've, got their investment back like 10 times over because they invested in Dogecoin earlier this year. And every single one of them says, I don't know what the hell Dogecoin is, but it's making me money. So we'll talk a little bit about what money is, the characteristics that money needs, and then why cryptocurrencies, I'm going to focus on Bitcoin specifically because that's the most talked about one, why it's designed the way it is. Because one of the biggest flaws about Bitcoin's design is to overcome the biggest problem that it would face. So it beats, triumphs over this one difficulty, but it sets up other difficulties. So hopefully you walk out here with a little bit more understanding. Then we'll talk about some other fun stuff. So the first thing we need to think about is, what is money? These 4 pictures up here are all different forms of money in different places in the world at different times. You all recognize the US dollar. I'll realize that's money. Looking at the silver coin on the right, with it looks like an owl on it. It's like an ancient Greek coin, I think. Still pretty common. But then we have things like pieces of less precious metal, or shells and beads, which have also served as money at different points. The reason why people have money is to facilitate trade. When Karl Menger, an economist from like the 1800s, was looking at money, he said, why are people willing to trade useful goods, willing to trade so much of their time for something that's a token? It's not worth anything in and of itself. The purpose of money is to facilitate trade. So you don't have to barter with someone. You can use money to buy whatever you want, whenever you want. Barter is straight up direct exchange. So if you want something, you have to give something to a person that has it that they value. Much easier to do when it's just a small village and everyone has like their own commodities. Very difficult to be an accountant and say, hey, I'll do some accounting work for you if you give me that shirt. Using barter makes specialization very difficult. So it's difficult for people to focus on just one, focus on one job, become really, really productive. So there's 2 theories about how money supplanted barter. The first one is called chartalism. Basically, the king or the ruler of that area said, okay, we're going to start using this precious metal. Very little evidence to back that up, despite the strong role today that governments have in money creation and overseeing the money supply. The other is, that's an attempt to be a picture of the invisible hand, but it's tough to have a picture of something invisible. Invisible hand, basically, each individual acting in their own self-interest slowly developed money out of barter. So if you were, okay, there's problems with direct exchange. So if you're an asparagus farmer, not a lot of people like asparagus, you want to get a shirt. It's going to be pretty difficult. You need to find someone that has a shirt that also wants asparagus. As an asparagus farmer, you're kind of SOL. If you're someone who sells salt, you're in a much better position. A lot of people want salt, especially if it's like you're in a middle-aged village. That's like the only spice, or the only seasoning you can have. So a lot of people want that. So if you're an asparagus farmer, you can either go for the shirt, or you can say, oh, a lot of people like salt. I'll trade for salt. It's much easier to do. And then I'll use that salt to buy whatever I'm looking for. The plan isn't to create money. The plan is to, try to make trade easier for you. But over time, more and more people start trading whatever they have for salt, and then using that salt as if it's a currency. This is called Mengerian convergence. Basically, over time, it's going to converge on one standard. The easiest thing, the thing that most people want, something that makes trade as easy as possible, is going to end up being the currency. Yeah, so basically like a snowball rolling down a hill. Starts out pretty small, but over time, as more and more people start using it, it becomes more and more valuable. Same thing we talked about, like network externalities with like national monopolies. Facebook, at first, when not that many people are on it, none of your friends are on it, can't do that much for you. But over time, as more and more people get it, it becomes more and more valuable. It's the same kind of thing with money. The more people accept it, the more and more useful it is for you. Yeah, so money's core role, according to Karl Menger, is being used as a commonly accepted medium of exchange. Basically, if you want to buy something, anywhere you can go, people are going to accept that as money. So it's very easy to trade with, very easy to get what you want. But there's two other roles that money has. One is a store of value. So it's not just useful today, but if you don't need to buy anything right now, you can still have that money and save it for later. And later on you can buy it, and it's going to retain that value. Doesn't really seem like a problem to us in modern society, but if you're, a small medieval farming community, wheat goes bad, it eventually rots. The food that you're trying to trade goes bad. So that's not good to use for currency. You need something that's going to maintain its value over time. So you can buy stuff in like the winter season when there's nothing around. And the final is the unit of account. It's much easier to engage in trade when prices are listed in one thing and you're using that one thing to pay for it. Also makes it easier to run a business and just have, a basic T account of assets and liabilities. You can keep track of whether you're making money or losing money. So initially, precious metals are like served as currency for a couple thousand years. There's 5 key characteristics that make something good money. The first is something that's durable, with no spoilers, so you can save money over time. You can purchase something not just today, but next week, next month, next year. If you're using something like tulips as currency, today you're kind of going to be screwed. And this whole summer we might be screwed with like snow like this, ruining the spring. But something like silver or oxen or barley, which have all been used as currency, they're pretty durable. Barley, as compared to like other, foodstuffs, pretty durable. It's not going to spoil, at least not quickly. Another thing you want in money is portable. So it has to be highly valuable compared to its weight. Or easy to transport around, just again, to make transactions easier. If it's hard to engage in transactions with the currency, it's not going to do a good job of being a currency. So oxen are pretty portable, even though they're really big and heavy. They were really valuable, and they have legs to walk themselves. Silver, extremely valuable compared to its size, so again, very portable. Barley, on the other hand, you need giant baskets to make small transactions. Sweden was on the copper standard for, in like the Middle Ages. But you basically needed, if you want to engage in any sort of transaction, you needed to hire some young beefcake to carry around hundreds and hundreds of pounds of copper just to buy something small and normal. Let me see if anyone really wants those points. No. The new rules, you have to sing or like quote something from a movie.
Quote something from a movie?
Yeah, in order to get the points. But you get 3 points instead of 1 point on the final.
Quote something from a movie.
Or sing something. Go a little above and beyond for the last couple classes.
Oh, okay.
So next, the currency needs to be divisible. You need to be able to engage in small transactions and large transactions. That's why the US dollar, we go all the way down to pennies. You have up to like $1,000 bills. Oxen are not very divisible, shockingly, right? And Dwight Schrute had that, that invention where you could grind off like 1 hamburger at a time from a horse without killing it. Not really something you can do in the real world. You have to kill the entire oxen. So it's not too divisible. You can't make small purchases and large purchases with it. Next is it needs to be uniform or easy to grade. So if you coin silver, that's the case. It's easy to see how much that coin is worth. Again, it makes it easy to engage in transactions. You don't have to worry. You don't have to look at the coin and what they call assay it, like assess to see what its value is. Is this really silver? Or is there like some stuff inside of it, some other metals? And finally, you need a stable value. So it can't be something that's seasonal, like barley is seasonal, so you would have a lot of currency during like the fall after the harvest, but then into the spring and summer the next year, as people use the barley for food, you'd have less and less currency out there. So you're having wild swings throughout the year. Wild swings is going to come into play with Bitcoin. Okay. So now let's look at alternates to today's monetary system. These are all slides I took from, or almost all of them are slides I took from a monetary theory class I had in grad school. The first alternative to today's monetary system, well, I'll say, today's monetary system is called fiat currency. Fiat currency is not backed by anything. So we converged basically across the world on precious metals. That lasted for a very long time. Eventually, we had paper money that was backed by that precious metal. It was something of value. In the US, up until like the Great Depression, basically banks would all issue their own currency, their own paper currency. They would have a certain amount of gold in their vaults, and each currency was a claim on that gold, so it was on something valuable. This was a good way to prevent inflation from taking off, because if you presented that bank with that, with that piece of paper, they would have to pay you gold or silver. If they put out too many bills, it would cause some inflation. Prices rise because you have more dollars chasing the same number of goods. That would increase their profitability, having more currency out there of theirs. But there's a higher risk that people would show up and demand the actual gold or silver for that currency. They didn't have enough of the precious metals on hand. They have to suspend redemption of payments. They basically go bankrupt. They're SOL. During the Great Depression, FDR took us off the gold standard. So basically, we had fiat money. It was not backed by anything. It was backed by, we now say, the full faith and credit of the US government. So nothing. You can't turn it in and get something of value to be able to trade. Because of that, inflation is much easier to occur nowadays. Now, Friedrich Hayek, back in the late 1970s, he gets awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics for his role in the socialist calculation debate back in the 1930s. He had not been talking about economics or writing about economics for 20 or so years. He shifted more into political science. And he's like, oh, people care about my economic stuff again. Okay, so he writes a paper on competing privately issued fiat currencies. So these are privately issued by banks or companies, groups of nerds that get together and write computer code, whatever, with no backing to any sort of precious metal or any commodity of value. So this money's not redeemable, so there's nothing stopping people from hyperinflating. Flood the market with your currency. You're the one who's expend it into circulation. So it's like you're counterfeiting. You get a ton of money yourself, but immediately drives down the value to nothing. So it takes a ton of money just to buy a loaf of bread. Now the reason why, or one of the reasons why this can't exist in the real world is it's contrary to Megarian convergence. People prefer to have one unit of account. You don't want 10 prices listed. When you go to buy something, you just want one currency. It makes it so much easier. So we would tend to, even if we had this privately issued, all these different types of currency, we would tend to converge to one. Only one is going to really be used. Another thing is he said that the private issuers would promise a stable spending power, that they wouldn't engage in inflation. And he worked out some fancy math to show that this would be the case, that if you promise to be at this value and you started cheating away a little bit, spending a little bit of money into circulation to pad your own pockets, what would happen is people would not trust it and they would immediately flee to some other currency. Your currency wouldn't be used and the value would collapse. Unfortunately, other people looking at his idea said that this wouldn't be the case, this wouldn't work, and the profit maximizing move for anyone issuing private currency would be hyperinflation. I bring this up because this is, again, a problem that Bitcoin solves, but then creates other problems for it. Ben Klein said that brand name capital and Hayek's system could work. So he built off Hayek's model. If there was inflation, your brand name would erode. And again, that would reduce its usage. And he had a fancy mathematical model showing that if brand name capital was worth this much for someone privately issuing a currency, that this would hold. Again, his assumptions were unrealistic. Other economists have done other fancy math to show it wouldn't work. And I think common sense shows us that this would not work in practice. Eugene Fama and Fisher Black. Fama has the Nobel Prize. I think, well, Black has the Nobel Prize too, writing with someone else. They're more finance guys. They said you can do payments without money. So instead of using US dollars, it's any asset of value. So you could use treasury bills, bonds, from Apple. Anything that has a certain value, you could use to pay for stuff. Again, it's contrary to Mengerian convergence. You see banks kind of doing that, but you never see individuals doing that. It's a little too difficult. Yes, so this was basically what I saw from that class, that economics is a liar sometimes. 3 Nobel Prize winners, all making us look like stupid econ bitches. So Bitcoin, very quickly, describing characteristics of Bitcoin. It's privately issued, so there's a small group of people that got together, wrote the white paper, and released Bitcoin. So it's not backed by government, and it's also irredeemable fiat money. So it's not tied to anything of value. So you can't take your Bitcoin and get issued something of value from, I don't know, the nerds that run Bitcoin. It's also digital, so there's no paper Bitcoin currencies or like coins. You can get some people get like certificates of like the actual like Bitcoin number they have, but it's not like real currency you would trade with someone. It's like something you hang on your wall to show that you're a nerd. Each Bitcoin has a unique string of characters that only that coin has, and that's how they keep track of it. They have a giant ledger called the blockchain, which ensures basically that you know who has each coin, who has claim to it. Anytime there's a transaction, they have people validate those transactions. Anyone can validate a transaction for Bitcoin, and you get paid a little bit of Bitcoin for doing that. It's called Bitcoin mining. I had a friend who did some Bitcoin mining back like 2011. Has a good bit of money from doing that, especially now that it's worth so much, when it was worth like, I don't know, half a cent back then. Bitcoin is a medium of exchange. You can use Bitcoin to buy stuff, and not just things on the dark web and like illegal drugs. You can go to food trucks in DC and spend Bitcoin. You can send Bitcoin to peers, when you're buying from your friends or something. It's pretty commonly used to buy or send money overseas. So if you're, you move to the US, the rest of your family is back in the country you came from, you can wire money through Western Union and pay a bunch of fees. Or if you both have smartphones, you can just send them some Bitcoin without the fees. So it's much cheaper and easier. Yes, and it's issued at a declining rate that's pre-programmed. This is how they solve the problem of privately issued currencies naturally hyperinflating. Because the people that run Bitcoin, it takes, 51% of people that own Bitcoin to like make a decision, to like change something about Bitcoin, but they don't want to do it. They naturally don't want to, because if you start changing the rules, people are going to think, oh, they're just going to hyperinflate their currency. There's no reason to hold it. They've committed to issuing the currency at a path. Well, this is time, and this is the number of Bitcoin. I forget exactly what the path is. I think it's just like one. And I don't remember the exact number. We'll call it 10 trillion Bitcoin. They set a target. That's what the money supply is going to be. It started out, they just had a few Bitcoin, and every time you mined, you validate these transactions, you got a good amount of Bitcoin. But over time, the growth slowed. We're now like way up here. So if you mine Bitcoin, you're getting a lot less for that than you were in the past. By staying on this path, they're committing to not hyperinflating. They're saying we are never going to increase the money supply. We're not going to create a bunch of Bitcoin, give it to us, and then spend it while it's of high value. Then once we flood the money supply, drives down the value, you're going to be stuck with something of less value. This is a way to tie them, to credibly commit themselves to not doing that. But this causes a problem. People's demand to hold Bitcoin as currency is constantly fluctuating. Because it's not the commonly used medium of exchange, prices in the US are priced in US dollars. People are paying US dollars for their labor costs, for the cost of capital, for the resources they're using in production. So everything's going to be marked in US dollars. So if you want to pay for something in Bitcoin, people aren't going to be very excited to accept it. Again, because we have the value of Bitcoin fluctuating. And I have an old chart on here. Yeah, we see the price here. And again, this is old because the price is $5,300. We have, what you can see up here, fluctuating wildly back and forth. The reason is sometimes people want to hold more, so they will spend US dollars on Bitcoin. The more people are trying to buy Bitcoin, like anything else, it drives the price up. When fewer people want to buy Bitcoin, price is going to go down. Because you can't change the money supply, like with the US dollar, when we have the Federal Reserve do, basically, is try to keep the value of the US dollar fairly stable. So if a lot of people want to hold money, they increase the money supply. A bunch of people don't want to hold the US dollar, they want to hold foreign currencies or gold or something else. They pull money out of the money supply. Keeps the value stable, keeps wild swings like this from happening. So because Bitcoin is solving like Hayek's problem, that problem of trying to somehow credibly commit that they're not going to hyperinflate the currency and make it worthless, they get stuck with this highly oscillating value. If all the goods and services were priced in Bitcoin, this fluctuation in value wouldn't really be a big deal, because the prices that are listed would be stable, the value goes down or up. The result wouldn't fluctuate as much, and it wouldn't be that big of a deal. But because everything's priced in US dollars, just in the USA, obviously other countries it's priced in their currency, we see these wild swings. And it makes it very difficult to actually use Bitcoin as a currency. So even though it is a medium of exchange, it does have some value. It doesn't have a lot of value as an actual currency right now. And other cryptocurrencies suffer from the same exact problem. That most of them credibly commit to some sort of path like this for money supply growth, which makes their value fluctuate up and down based off whether people want to hold it or not. That makes Bitcoin inherently risky. See the peak up here, a while back, and then it plummeted from like 17K to like $5,000. Now it's up, I don't know if anyone's checked it recently, like over 60. So big. It was flat for a while, and then like a slow takeoff, and then just spiked again, like during COVID. One of the reasons that a lot of people buy Bitcoin, reason why I bought some, is because as more people want to hold Bitcoin, that's going to naturally drive the price up. It's going to increase the money demand. You imagine a supply and demand graph. Your supply is stable, never going to change. But you've got the demand curve that's going to move left and right based off how many people want to hold it. Well, in other countries where they have massive inflation, Bitcoin can be a better store of value. It can be more stable than a currency experiencing hyperinflation. So currencies that experience hyperinflation, obviously people don't want to hold them. There's a couple solutions. In Central and South America, they tend to what's called dollarize. They abandon their currency and use US dollars. Remember, 80% of the $100 bills for the US are circulating outside of the country. A lot of them are held in banks, but a lot of them are held by people. A lot of currency while US dollars are outside of it. So countries will just switch to US dollars. Another thing they can do is peg their currency. They get rid of their old currency. They establish a new currency and they say this is the exchange rate between the old one and the new one. And the new one is tied to the value of the US dollar. So that prevents them from being able to hyperinflate their currency again, to try to make people trust it. Yeah, so if you see countries hyperinflating, they may switch to the US dollar, or they may switch to Bitcoin. South Africa has had some problems with persistently high inflation lately. Should be no shock that out of all the countries in Africa, they're buying and holding the most Bitcoin. It's a hedge on inflation. Like your parents or grandparents may invest in gold as a hedge in inflation. It's the new digital version of that. Gold would still probably be better to use as a currency than Bitcoin is today. But still, it serves the same sort of purpose for most people to hold on to Bitcoin.
You're talking Dogecoin?
I didn't buy any. I really, really wish I would have. I mean, it's just a meme coin, but people have a bunch of money now. They're not spending it.
Do you think it's going to actually do anything like significant?
No. It was set up as a meme.
Yeah. Elon must be tweeting about it though.
I really thought it was going to take off the other day on 420.
Yeah.
That was like the joke about it, and Musk he got in trouble with the SEC for tweeting about Tesla's price being like, what, 420.69?
Yeah. I accidentally sold all mine the other day. I bought Dogecoin like earlier in the year.
Oh, so you made some good money.
Yeah, I only bought, I bought $20 worth, it was like 2,000 shares, and I was like going, like it was up to like 45 cents, and I went to like check how much I could sell it all for, and I accidentally clicked sell, and I sold it all. I sold it for like $700.
I mean, it's a good time to sell, but
Yeah, but I don't know. I was still around the hype that Elon Musk was going to keep hyping it up and it was going to keep going up.
yeah, it's hard to imagine it going down in the near term.
Yeah.
At one point in Venezuela, they were using Dogecoin for transactions when they were hyperinflating a couple years ago. It may seem like people in foreign countries using Bitcoin or any cryptocurrency is kind of like a joke or like a dumb idea, but more people in the world have cell phones than have bank accounts, which is interesting now. So if you have a cell phone, a smartphone, most people have, you do have access to cryptocurrencies. Yeah.
Can you explain mining again?
So basically, you get paid a little bit of Bitcoin for validating a transaction. So you set your computer up to run the program, I guess. I've never done this, so I can only explain it kind of like theoretically, not from experience. But the computer, I guess, runs the Bitcoin program, which you can pull up online. You can pull up the white paper where they describe everything. You can pull up the code and see what they're actually doing. I wouldn't know what the hell it means, but I can if I want to. And so you send, if I buy something from you and send you Bitcoin, they have to adjust the ledger or the blockchain, what they call it, to make sure that it's removed from mine and sent to yours, and that only you have access to it. That's like another extremely hard part about cryptocurrencies. Anything using the computer is how do you make sure people don't just create a new currency with the same number. The first one of the early cryptocurrencies before Bitcoin had that problem. They couldn't figure out how to make sure only one person had the coin at a time. But for doing that, it takes up like a bunch of electricity. It takes time, your computer's doing that. I'm sure it just runs in the background. I bet it slows it down if you have like super high powered computer. So they give you a little bit of Bitcoin. Plus it's a great way, especially early on, to get money into circulation. And cryptocurrencies are fun and interesting. It's hard to imagine them taking over something like the US dollar. Most countries require you to pay your taxes in their country's currency. You have to pay US dollars to the federal government for your taxes. So it makes it more difficult for people who want to adopt Bitcoin or use Bitcoin, because you're going to have to get out of Bitcoin when you pay your taxes anyway. So even if more people wanted to switch over to using Bitcoin for purchasing and for accepting money, there would still be that difficulty. But you can imagine a country where they're experiencing persistent inflation, where Bitcoin actually makes more sense to use, or in some other cryptocurrency. If anything, I think it's interesting. Milton Friedman talked about, was he late 80s, early 90s, about, there's this internet thing out there. People are going to use it for a lot of cool things, maybe even create a currency on there. It turns out people were able to create something like a currency on there. You guys have any other questions about Bitcoin? Like I said, I may throw like an extra credit question on the final about it, but I'm not going to test you guys on that. It's just something I want to talk about because I don't think anyone else here can like give a lecture on cryptocurrencies. And it's at least worth knowing what the hell it is. If your friends are like, hey, I just threw $100 into Dogecoin. So early on in this course, I talked about the assumption of rationality in economics and how we assume that people try to maximize their benefit subject to their cost. You try to get as much benefit as you can and pay as low of a cost as possible to get it. But people do a lot of weird things. So if you try to extend economic analysis, when we're looking at consumers and firms, to other areas outside of economics, some people say, at least looking at it initially, well, you really can't. It breaks down these assumptions. It doesn't make sense. So the next, half of this class and half or so of next class, we're going to use the tools of economics to look at some weird things. We'll look at non-market decision making. So we'll extend our ideas of methodological individualism, so focusing on people instead of groups, rational actors, and again, from an economic sense, not from a normal standpoint of how we think of rationality. Economizing behavior and thinking through incentives to decision making and things going on outside of the market. So there's a lot of beliefs out there that may seem very odd. They may just think they're dumb superstitions, but they're actually rational responses to problems that people face. And they're really clever ways to overcome those problems. So we want to break down some of these odd practices using the tools of economics to help us understand just what the hell is going on in some of these cases. So in everyday life, rationality, we think of using reason instead of emotion. Think of, adding things up and thinking through mathematically instead of just going with our gut. But economic analysis has a very specific meaning. That people act in their own self-interest. They try to maximize their utility or their enjoyment of the world. They're going to choose more of a good over less of a good. They're going to consider the benefits and costs. And remember, these aren't pure Ayn Rand kind of purely selfish people. Within your own self-interest is also the happiness of your family and your friends. You want people around you to be doing well as well. You may not rate their happiness as high as the importance of your happiness, but you still care about them. You're still going to be willing to do charity work. You're going to be willing to lend your friend $5 knowing you're not going to get that money back. Things like that. But you still derive a benefit from it, even though it's not specifically the thing making you happy. Now, rationality is necessary for economic analysis. If we don't assume that people want more of a good to less of a good, if they're not going to choose what they think is best for them, if they're going to choose randomly, then we're not going to be able to anticipate what people do. Demand curves won't slope downward and supply curves won't slope upwards. We can't predict people's actions. Cass Sunstein wrote a book called Nudge Theory. Some more like conservative people, kind of freaked out about the book, thought it was weird. Other people on the left thought it was interesting. Most people just never heard of it or ignored it. Nudge theory explicitly denies rationality, but at the same time needs rationality for it to work. Basically, what they say with nudge theory is we should use small things, small incentives to encourage people to do good things or discourage them from bad things. People tend to have a lot of impulse buys right by the cash register where you see like a bunch of candy bars. Always put the high impulse goods there. They said, well, instead of doing that, we should make supermarkets put like fresh fruit and vegetables in. Or I guess just more like fresh fruit. You don't really snack on vegetables. Again, encourage people to make healthier options. that, using incentives, you're decreasing the cost of getting fresh fruit because it happens to be right there. So a lot less searching, a lot less walking across the store for it. Just make it easier. Instead of allowing people to opt into a 401k, have them automatically enrolled and force them to opt out. About 30% of workers will opt into a 401k, and about 30% will opt out of 401k. So there's a big chunk of people that just will do whatever you automatically have them do. So they say, well, instead of having people opt into it, only 30% of people save. Force them to, 30% will opt out, but now we'll have 70% of people saving. So 40% more people will save. But you need rationality for these nudges to work. So we're going to talk through some of the weird things that people have done in the past, a couple of the weird things that people do today, and see how they're actually really ingenious responses to problems they're facing. Oh yeah, and COVID-19 has some people acting what we would deem as irrational, hoarding toilet paper. A woman from South Park just fighting and willing to kill people over what was that? That was the Good Friday episode, or that Good Friday, the Black Friday episode. Willing to spend a ton of money, or lose a ton of value to stand in line for days, willing to fight people over getting very cheap goods. We're going to start with witch doctors, because this is how one of my professors in grad school taught an entire course on this after going to a witch doctor. So after the collapse of the Soviet Union, 1989, in Eastern Europe, they went from communist, so like centrally planned economies, to a free market economy. Well, obviously not totally free market, but they allowed a lot of private enterprise where they hadn't in the past. So a bunch of economists and PhD students from George Mason went over there to Eastern Europe when it happened, and then like a decade or two later, to see how the process was going, to see what it was like as economies transitioned from centrally planned to markets. While most economists would say that markets are better than centrally planned economies, we can imagine a lot of problems and pitfalls that will happen from switching over from centrally planned to a market economy. So it's cool to go on the ground and actually see what it was like in the real world, what the real problems they would face would be, and figure out like best practices like that. Well, one of my professors went over to Eastern Europe. They were in Romania, in the countryside, seeing how it impacted the the rural villages. So going through the countryside, yeah, they were going from village to village, very remote areas. Basically what they would do all night is, like in these villages, drank a ton of homemade vodka. That was like their custom and their entertainment. So Pete Leeson, who was my professor, did this. He talked about how sick he got. Terrible, terrible stomach pains, like couldn't sleep at night, was like constantly sweating. Really thought something bad was gonna happen. And they're nowhere near a hospital. They're like a day or two drive from a hospital. So he thinks he's gonna die. But their Romanian tour guide says, hey, you're in luck. There's actually a doctor in the next village over. He's all excited. He thinks, all right, I'm safe. I can't believe this. The guy takes him there. He goes into a hut. Not like a brick building or anything. It's like a hut. And it's got potions all in there. Weird things like frog eyes and stuff in vials. All these odd, ritualistic things in the place. He's like, this dude's he's a witch doctor. This is not a medical doctor. So he got out of there real fast, and he said, I'm just going to suffer stomach pains. Maybe I'll die, maybe I'll live, but I'm not going to go to a witch doctor and get a shrunken head. So what witch doctors are in the real world is healers that provide treatments for very basic ailments. And they're not just BS, because they wouldn't persist for thousands of years if they were just making people worse, or if they weren't doing anything. You have to somehow, at least sometimes, make people better. You have to appear to have a good track record. So something good has to be going on there. So what purpose could all this ritual and this prayer and these weird potions actually serve? Well, think of a pharmaceutical firm. that are providing treatments for ailments. They engage in a lot of research and development. It costs a lot of money. What do they do after they create a new drug? They're about to bring it to the market. They slap a patent on it. So they're the only one that's selling it, at least for a while before generics come out. In the Romanian countryside, you don't have the benefit of the US patent system. You don't have something to protect your proprietary formulas. So what they do is they erect barriers to entry using other methods. So basically, the potions they have are real treatments. When your stomach hurts, what does your grandma tell you to do? Drink ginger ale? Anyone? Okay. Because ginger root, helps an upset stomach. So, witch doctor, if you go to a witch doctor and you have an upset stomach, they give you a potion or whatever that has a bunch of ginger root in it. But ginger is naturally growing. You can go in the woods and pick it. You can even grow it in your own backyard. So if you knew that, why would you go to the witch doctor for anything? You would just do it yourself and eat the ginger, drink the ginger. So what the witch doctor does, put some other weird tasting ingredients in there, cover up the taste, so you don't know what he's giving you. This witch doctor is using this as sort of like a patent to cover it up, so you don't know what he's doing. Then, to increase his, protection of his market share, he says a bunch of prayers, does a formal ritual because he has contacts with God or with the local spirits, whatever the local religion believes in. Again, establishing another barrier. And you have to have this spiritual connection or it's not going to work. So what we end up with is actually normal remedies with things in them that taste weird and other rituals to prevent normal people from doing it on their own. So now you've protected your market, you've prevented competition from coming in and taking your job away from you. And this may not need a previous spiritual belief in the supernatural. If you see someone, you see the witch doctor doing these rituals, and then this weird tasting potion works, it helps cure a bunch of these ailments, that's going to develop this belief in the supernatural over time. So it doesn't need to exist ex ante, like we'll see with some of these other strange practices. And it basically serves like a primitive version of occupational licensing. Because you need to learn the specific rituals in order to be able to do this, the witch doctors can choose who to train as their replacements. So they can limit the supply of witch doctors. Basically what physicians do with professional licensing through the American Medical Association. The same basic idea. They're just doing it in a different way. So Pete would have been perfectly fine going to the witch doctor. He would have gotten a decent treatment for his stomach, and he'd have come out okay. He wouldn't have ended up with a shrunken head or something wrong like that. Okay, before we get to gypsies, I was reading last night and happened to come across some examples related to this that I wasn't planning on. So there's a tribe of natives in Ontario, the Niskapi, who hunt caribou. They have to try to decide where to hunt the caribou. But it can be a very difficult decision because common sense says, go where you normally see caribou. But caribou are going to learn fairly quickly, hey, every time I go there, I get hunted by these human things, so I'm not going to go back there. Animals have the instincts to not go back. So you don't want to go back where you've been successful, but that's the natural human tendency to want to do. So the best strategy for hunting the caribou requires randomization. You go to random places, not the same place over and over again, to try to hunt the caribou. So how they decide where to go hunt has no relation to logic, to past history, none of that. What they do is they take the shoulder bone of a caribou that they've already hunted, and they put it in a fire. And when they do that, it cracks in certain ways. They hold it up in a certain direction, and the random lines that result from the fire burning tells them where to go hunt. It's entirely random. So instead of going to similar places or trying to randomize themselves, they use basically a random number generator coming from this bone in order to randomize it. And by doing that, they're much more successful hunters. And over time, I don't know how it would start, but one person decides to do it. They're going to use this to randomize it. They're much more successful than the other bands of hunters. The other bands of hunters learn from them. And pretty soon that's what the entire group of people do. There's other tribes that do very similar things to this. So the Kantus of in Indonesia use birds to select the location of their agricultural plots. Because they live in a place that's flooded quite frequently, and they grow rice, which is apparently very susceptible to these floods. They believe that, like normal people believe, like gambler's fallacy, that if an area floods one year, it's not likely to happen there the next. It turns out that it's very likely to happen there the next year. It's where the flooding actually takes place, extremely random. If they plant somewhere and it floods, they lose all the crops. They don't get any food. So what they do is they need to figure out a way to randomize it. So they use like whatever, a certain type of bird landing the field, that's where they plant this year. Instead of picking where, a place that flooded last year because they don't think it's going to flood this year. Or planting nearby where someone had a really good harvest the year before. Again, they use the birds to totally randomize it. And what they do is they're extremely successful growing rice. This was not a practice they had before rice was introduced in the 1700s. They planted where they thought was best. And the previous crops they grew were more, flooding wouldn't just like wipe them out completely. So even if there was flooding, it would be okay. So that wasn't something they had to worry about. There's another group near them that does not grow rice, but has the same kind of random flooding. Those crops are still, able to withstand the flood. They don't use the birds to do that. There's one more example. Oh, the Romans. The Roman Empire, when they were going into war, would use birds again to determine where to attack their enemies. Do you attack the left flank, the right flank? Do you come right down the middle? Again, if you develop a strategy, one general tends to go this way. The opposing general is going to know that, and they're going to build up their defenses. And so you gain trying to think through what your opponent's going to do. So what they would do is use the birds to attack randomly. There's no way the enemy could scout that out ahead of time because they don't know what the birds are going to do ahead of time. So this is a good example of where a random strategy could be useful. Because you don't want to be predictable. You want to go in random so they don't know where to send their troops, where to reinforce their line. That reminds me of my friend Devin, who I play poker with. He refuses to learn like the order of the hands on like the higher end. It's easy to know like 3 of a kind beats a pair. On the upper end, he doesn't know. He doesn't want to know because he plays purely randomly. Every now and then, if he's like played too many hands in a row well, if we're playing Texas Hold'em, we'll not look at his 2 cards that are underneath. He's impossible to get a read on, and you don't know what he's doing. So he's extremely hard to play against. The same sort of idea, if you randomize when randomization is better than picking the same thing over and over again, you need to find a way to randomize. Even if you believe the birds are going to tell you where to go, you are effectively randomizing. You're going to be better than people that don't do that. That's from, all the examples are from the book, The Secret of My Success, or Secret of Our Success, by Joe Heinrich, who's an anthropologist, basically talking about how these cultural beliefs are passed on from one human to the next and from civilization to civilization. I haven't actually read the book, I was just reading the book review, but his newest book, The Weirdest People in the World, I thought was really awesome. Next, we're going to talk about gypsy law. The gypsies have a lot of very strange seemingly strange laws and practices and beliefs. And they have their sort of like what you would call civil law intermixed with their religious law. So any like crime you would commit, what we would think of as a crime, you also have a spiritual punishment from. Be like if the Catholic Church said you're going to hell because you didn't pay your taxes to the government. They're both like mixed together. And these aren't legislated, these are traditions they have. They're built up over a long period of time rather than something that a lawmaker set down. You don't have Hammurabi or Justinian or so on deciding this is what you're going to, this is what the rules are. They've been built up over a long period of time. Like English common law, only way more dispersed and traditional. Yeah, so gypsies are nomadic people. They can't use the government or even simple ostracism to produce social order. They have to figure out their own methods of doing so. Fringe societies and groups tend to not be able to rely on government, so you can't rely on the law. So what they tend to do is have their own code, and they enforce it themselves. The typical method is ostracism, like if someone is a bad person, keeps breaking these rules you have, you don't talk to them, you don't let them be part of your group, and if it's bad enough, you even kick them out and say they're never allowed to come back. You look at, any of you guys have seen the documentary Wild Wild Country on Netflix? They sort of don't have the government to oversee them, so they make their own rules. They have their own local governance. If you haven't, I highly recommend watching it. It's this hippie group from India that came over to Oregon, bought like a plot of land in this town, like a big ranch, and ended up trying to take over the Oregon state government. It's a crazy story. So basically, gypsy law is grounded in this superstition that see unguarded contact with the lower half of the human body, like the sexual organs, as ritually polluting. And this defilement is contagious. So if someone is ritualistically impure, dealing with them, talking to them, being friends with them, will make you impure. And non-gypsies, so all of us, or at least most of us in here, are in an extreme state of such defilement because we don't follow the laws. So the Romagna is the gypsy law. It's customary and oral, so it's built up over time. And it's not that it's written down or proclaimed, something that's slowly built up. Marima means ritual pollution. It means you've broken the laws in the gypsy code. Vujo was ritual cleanliness. It was taking care to follow those laws. Now, gypsies have very difficult problems to solve because they're nomadic and because their whole gypsy society is so spread out. So they're in small groups going around from area to area. They're not interacting with each other. They're not all living together like the Sri Rajneesh and Wild Wild Country in Oregon. So they have to use even more extreme or different ways than just using the government law, their own private law, or ostracism to take care of this. So we'll go through, it's getting close to the end, so we'll talk about some of the weird things that gypsies do, and we'll probably finish off beginning next class with what the hell they're trying to solve with these things. So they believe that the body is unclean, a marima below the waist. So any unguarded contact with the lower half of the body makes that person marine. So they have to take a lot of great care and spend a lot of time to avoid the sort of contact with their lower half or another person's lower half. There's some examples. Women's skirts are marine because it covers the lower part of their body. Men's pants, the same thing, marine because they cover the lower part of their bodies. Yeah, so if there are some examples of like gypsy men like getting into a fight, gypsy women would come out and toss their skirts, so like they have the big like old school like skirts. They kind of wave around like that, getting close to them. Because that would make the men marine, that would help break up the fight. They would jump back, they would, instead of fighting each other, just try to avoid touching them. So if men and women walk in front of each other while they're seated, so that their like genitals pass like their face area, that would make the seated one marine or unclean. So it makes it very difficult to just, sit around your house when you have these rules. You have to take care constantly to make sure you're walking in the right place or that you're not sitting down where someone's walking by. So it's extremely costly and extremely annoying to try to live this way. Women have to wear aprons while preparing food, again, blocking their skirt from polluting the food. Guys, when they're cooking, have to wear aprons too, because the lower half of the body is so unclean. Sex is extremely delicate. I'm not going to get into all the details of it, but because there's physical contact between the body's lower halves, has the potential to really pollute people. And different types of sex are marine. They're not, most common simple forms. Hands are interesting because they go between both halves of the human being, bottom half and upper half. So there's a lot of extreme rules about gypsies' hands. They can't wash their hands in the same sink as dishes or eating utensils. Again, because the pollution from their hands could get onto those utensils. From there, a gypsy using them to eat would eat polluted food, thus polluting themselves. So they can't use sponges or cloths to clean their bodies, and also dishes and cutlery. They can't wash them together, again, because you would get the pollution from your body on there. Dishes or utensils that person washes in the wrong sink or with the wrong sponge or dries off with the wrong towel, those dishes become marine and have to be discarded. If you're a gypsy traveling across the countryside, you don't have a ton of extra dishes on hand. So again, this is extremely costly. Plus, you have to constantly be thinking about whether you're washing your hands in the right sink, whether you're using the right sponge, things like that. So it's constantly on your mind. It's a big cost for living your life compared to this, the carefree life that we live. Dogs and cats are considered dirty because they don't follow these rules. Non-gypsies, the Gaja, don't follow these rules, so they're dirty as well. If gypsies eat away from home, they have to bring their own dispensable cutlery, so they don't eat off of marine dishes. The other people have not followed the rules to clean. And they don't allow Gaja or non-gypsies into their living areas. If they do have them over to a house, they'll have them sit on a special chair that's only reserved for non-gypsies, and we'll only have them in the front room or on the front porch. Again, because they're unclean. So sociologists that study them say these laws make no sense. These are very, very odd rules. They don't seem to come from a logical area. And it seems like a lot of these are not counterproductive, but have nothing to do with maintaining good social order. What sink you wash your hands in doesn't affect whether you're a good person or not. At least most people don't feel that way outside of gypsy culture. So gypsies cannot rely on state institutions to enforce their contracts. They're turning more towards the legal aspect. A lot of gypsies form cartels for their various businesses. Easiest example is the fortune-telling business. They form a cartel, so each family has a certain area. They're allowed to be the fortune tellers, and others can't compete with them. They basically sign contracts agreeing to that. If one family or one group of gypsies would break that contract, they can't go to the state, because the state considers collusion not legally binding. They also can't rely on ostracism to punish someone who breaks these rules. When there's a large fraction of society's members who can closely and easily observe rule breakers and communicate with each other on who broke the rules, ostracism works. The Sri Rajneesh living on their ranch in Oregon all saw each other all the time, so it's very easy to do. This isn't possible for gypsies who are traveling, who are spread out. If you're in one camp, if someone breaks the rules in another camp, very difficult to find out about that. Obviously, they're not going to want to tell you. Communication, again, very difficult when they're living in caravans going from area to area. Additionally, ostracism faces a social action or collective action problem. So this is like how we talked about the the public goods, how people will tend to want a free ride on it once it's provided. It's the same sort of idea here. People are going to want a free ride. Say, okay, like, if a gypsy cheats, like, no one deals with them. But I don't want to spend all this time and effort trying to find out if this new gypsy that just showed up to my camp, if they actually did something bad to warrant this, or if they just wanted to change the scenery. No, it's going to be expensive. I'll let everyone else do that. I'll let it slide this time, and I'll hang out with the guy. Pretty much everyone would feel that way. Again, because there's a lot of effort to put into this. So they need to figure out a way to make gypsies find it worth it to figure out if the person that they're just meeting, another gypsy, broke the rules or not, whether they acted antisocially or whether they were, just coming for another reason, change of scenery, whatever. So what they do is they rely on these superstitions from the Romagna, from their code, to enforce the desirable behavior on other gypsies. Because it becomes very expensive, you're ritualistically impure, you've got this huge spiritual cost by talking to gypsies who are impure, by dealing with them, letting them live with you and hang out with you. You now have a strong incentive to figure out if that gypsy you're talking to has committed crimes or not, if they have failed to live up to the Romagna. So really, this is a way for them to overcome both the lack of reliance on a formal government and the private ostracism that they're not able to do. And now what they also do is they tie the rules for antisocial behavior. Guys fighting each other, the gypsy committing murder against another gypsy, cheating on the cartel agreement that they signed. They tie those to washing your hands in the wrong sink, eating off of dirty dishes, walking in front of someone who's seated, or having someone walk past you when you're seated. They tie these spiritual offenses and these worldly offenses together, and you become spiritually unclean from both of these. So now you have a strong incentive to look and see if that person you meet has committed these antisocial acts. And they have a very strict and unbending notion of purity. So it's not like, oh, it's okay, like, it was an accident that you let this person walk past you, or that you washed your hands in the wrong sink. We'll let it slide this time. They're extremely, extremely hard sticklers for these rules. But what it requires is a very strong belief in the superstition. They have to believe that it's true, it's going to affect them. So when nearly all the population believes in the superstition, they all abide by it. And they follow these rules very, very closely. Now, the reason they're able to make sure that all the members of the gypsy community are following the Romagna is because the cost of adhering to it is very high. In the Bible, in the New Testament, letters to Paul constantly talk and warn against lukewarm believers, people that are just kind of there and kind of follow the rules but also do their own thing. A lot of cults and a lot of successful religions have costly rules to be a member of that religion. And that screens out the weak believers. So you're left with a core of people that truly believe in the religion and they're going to follow the rules that they set forth and they want their members to follow. Example, the brawl stopped by the wife. The very, very high cost of being touched by that woman's skirts will make you morally impure. So it'll stop her husband and the other dude from fighting. It's strong enough that even in that heated moment, they know they need to follow the rules or they'll really, really get in trouble. And what it does is make each gypsy the first line of legal monitoring. So you get a situation where all of them are watching themselves. The lawbreaker believes in the supernatural punishment, so they know if they mess up, now they're impure. Almost every time, they would remove themselves from their own family until they were able to achieve some sort of forgiveness if it was a lower level offense, or just leave them entirely if it was an extremely high level offense, in order to save their family from also becoming impure. Because the crimes are contagious, you're going to care about your family, and if you think you're going to get caught, remove yourself from the family. Or if you truly believe it, remove yourself from the family. It also gives each gypsy a strong incentive to know the history of every new gypsy they run across. Any new person that joins them, if they committed crimes, whether it was washing your hands in the wrong sink or cheating on a cartel, they're going to need to find that out so they don't become impure themselves and have to leave their gypsy group. And they have a council called the Chris in the Romagna gypsies in Europe, like the continent of Europe. They have larger areas built up of Chris of like a bunch of gypsy camps from across like the region. If that council of elders declares, one gypsy has to follow their, they make a pronouncement, say you cheat on this cartel, you need to give this much money to the person that you entered their territory from. If they don't follow that order, they don't follow that rule, they become Marim. And they infect their whole family and friends, everyone in their camp, everyone they deal with. And this disdain for the Gaja, or for the non-gypsies, make this threat of punishment severe. You have to leave the community and live with people who are in a constant state of defilement. If you believe this defilement is bad, it's world-shattering. It's terrible for you. Gypsies kind of have a reputation of being swindlers that like steal from people and try to pull one over on them. Think of Brad Pitt's character in Snatch. He pulls one over on Jason Statham at the very beginning of the movie and causes problems for him the whole movie because of that. In gypsy law, it's totally fine for them to use their wits to take money from non-gypsies. Again, because we're so dirty and impure, it doesn't matter. It's fine for them to take money. But that kind of disdain of the outside world makes the threat of this punishment of needing to leave the gypsy society extremely strong. Now, there's some interesting aspects of the gypsies' belief that help provide some evidence that this is but this is a way to deal with the social problems they're facing. Only prime age individuals have to follow the Marim laws in the Romagna. The children and the elderly are both excluded from these rules. 96% of crimes in the US are committed by prime age adults. So like 18 to, 65. The people that you need to prevent from cheating on taxes, from beating each other up, those types of things, are young people. I mean, honestly, it's like dudes from like 16 to like 26, like most of the crime being committed by. But you get to 96 by like all prime age adults. So they tie the concept of spiritual purity to this antisocial behavior, whether it's physical crime or cheating other gypsies, or this these spiritual crimes, to the people that are most likely to commit crimes. Once you're not going to commit crimes anymore, or if your little kid is not going to commit crimes, you don't have to follow these rules. They don't tie it to that. Additionally, as the belief in these superstitions wane, the reliance on this code of law wanes as well. Like all religious beliefs in the past 50 or so years across the Western world, belief in this Marim has greatly diminished. And young gypsies don't follow the Chris anymore, don't really believe this. So the taboos are falling by the wayside, and gypsy elders are kind of upset about this. Well, what's going on? Cell phones make it easy to communicate between gypsies. They don't move around quite as much as they used to anymore. So life's less nomadic. The gypsies in California are able to use the state courts for a lot of their disputes. Not all of them, but for a lot of them. So they don't have the same problems they used to in the past. And the belief in this spiritual purity and impurity is waning as well. So the two things that are necessary for this code to be valuable. All right, so we're going to end here for the day. Oh, yeah, it's right about time.